Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode. My name is Terri Cole. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, a relationship expert, and the founder of Real Love Revolution and Boundary Bootcamp. And I'm going through all of the questions that those of you on my YouTube channel and who listen to my podcast and on my website have sent in. So I have a whole list, and for the next X number of weeks, probably 10 weeks, I'm going to be answering the questions that have come in. I'm also going to be going live on my YouTube channel. I'm going to be doing a once a month live show to answer your questions in real time. So if you are not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do. And I can't wait to start that. We will be starting that in April. So stay tuned for more details. In the meantime, the question that came in was about how this person can tell if they are just caring or if their helping goes over the edge to actually fall into the category of codependency. And I think that there's a lot of conversation that we hear out there in the interweb about codependency. And I wanted to really handle this in this episode because there's a fine line between codependent behavior and actual human caring behavior. So I want to get clear about that, and I'm giving you an extensive list, basically a checklist, so that you can tell how codependent or caring you are. So you don't need to take notes, don't worry, you can just download that after the fact, and you'll get an idea, depending on how many yeses or how many nos you have to the questions, as to your level of caring and or codependency. So let's first start with a basic understanding of codependency. It's pretty much foregoing your own needs or desires for someone else's. And if someone is really codependent, their sense of self-worth comes from caring for others in this dysfunctional way. So what does that look like? That looks like feeling responsible for the choices, the outcomes, the feeling states of other people, which is not the same as caring about, right? That is not the same as caring about the choices, the outcomes, and the feeling states of other people in your life. But if you feel actually responsible for that, and the real key to understanding codependency and your own tendencies is understanding how much you need to be needed by others. How much is that being needed a part of your self-identity? So it almost becomes an addiction unto itself, where we're addicted to, quote unquote, helping others or being a part of the solution. So before you make yourself pathological and give yourself this sort of long-term, this moniker, this name that you're codependent, let's dive deeper into what it is. I find that the women in my tribe, which is probably 80 or 85% of the people in my crew, have a tendency towards codependency because of the way that we're raised. So you have to think about the fact that societally, if we're looking at sort of heterogender normative stuff, right? The way that it's been for the past X number of decades, centuries, women are the caregivers, right? So we're the gatherers and men are the hunters in a heteronormative way. Now, that's changing, and I'm not making a sweeping generalization about what's happening today, but so many of the people who are asking me these questions were raised 4 decades ago, 3 decades ago, 5 decades ago, where it was super common to expect girls to be nice above everything else, to be caring, that if you were very assertive, that was looked at as negative and not feminine. So all of our tribe, our family of origin, the way that we were raised, the culture we were raised in, all of these things have to do with how codependent we become, because it's basically this downloaded blueprint of what does it mean to be a caring person. So there's other reasons we become codependent. So let's just talk a little bit more about what are the signs and symptoms of being codependent. So the first one is easy. It's what I said before. It's basically not being dialed into your own needs, being very dialed into the needs, the wants, the desires, the feeling state of someone else, the people that you love in your life. A lot of times it really shows up in romantic relationships, Are you worried that your romantic partner will be upset with you, will leave you if you don't fulfill their needs, if you don't do what it is that they want you to do, let's say? Another sign of codependency is basically covering for someone else or doing things for other people that developmentally, right, they should and can be doing for themselves, but instead you're doing it. So like a super easy example of that would be having an adult child, daughter, son, continue to come back to your house and you doing their laundry and they're 35. Or having an adult child living with you and you treating them like they're 12, even though they're 35. So that definitely is a sign of codependency, where you're overdoing and overgiving. And if you notice that you're very depleted from doing all of these things. So think about, are you resentful? Because with codependency, eventually we end up feeling resentful because we've in some ways voluntarily overgive and overdo. And at the heart of codependency, it really is the desire to control outcomes for other people, to make ourselves so irreplaceable, so utilitarian, so important to someone's day-to-day life that it almost makes us secure, like they won't leave us then. That's our value, is doing for other people or always having the answers for someone else. But if we're doing this at the expense of ourselves, you will end up resenting the person that you're doing it for. And how much energy do you actually have in a day and in your life? There's only so much. Sooner or later, as I like to say, the chickens will come home to roost. And what ends up happening is that there's some kind of a blow up. You might end up getting sick. If you're someone who spends a lot of time caregiving in this unhealthy way, right? This really brilliant PhD, her name is Shauna Burns, has a book out that's called Unhealthy Helping. And it really gives you an idea of what are the over-the-top things that you might be doing for someone, and you're doing them for yourself. This is another misunderstanding I find about codependent behaviors, is that so much of the time we like to think of ourselves, if we're acting codependently, and trust me, I'm a recovering codependent, so I do get it, no judgment coming from me, but we like to think of ourselves as being kind and caring, and we're doing it because we're so loving. And yet, in my 20s, through my own therapeutic process, I got to really understand that I was not doing it because I was so loving necessarily. It doesn't mean that I'm not loving. I am. But what I was trying to do was control the outcomes for people in my life. One of my sisters was having a lot of problems at that time and always was in terrible situations. And it would be super personal. I would give her advice. I would talk to her for hours on end. I would pay for things. I would do all of these different things again. And in my mind, I was doing them because I'm oh so loving. But what ended up happening was I was really doing it because the choices that she was making me so uncomfortable and so unhappy because it was unhealthy and it was dangerous and abusive relationships and all of these things, that I realized it wasn't my decision to make through the help of a very brilliant therapist. And I was able to step back and draw an appropriate boundary with that person until they were able to get it together. And I was like, hey, if you ever want to get out of this terrible abusive situation, I'm here for you, but you have to actually want that. I can't talk to you every day and have you telling me these terrible things about what's going on in your life when you're not willing to do anything about it. It's just too incredibly painful to do that. But that was the beginning of my own journey away from codependency and towards real caring. So another problem with people who have a tendency towards codependency is boundaries, is really not understanding where you end and the other person begins, right? Not knowing what is your side of the street, what is appropriate for you to be handling, and what is not. And so many of us, I mean, this is a downloaded blueprint, the way that I talk about downloaded boundary blueprints and downloaded love blueprints. This is a downloaded blueprint as well, because a lot of times this is learned behavior. So we've seen it somewhere before. And if in your parents' relationship or the people who raised you, if you saw that someone over-functioning for the other person, if that was love, if that was maternal, if you're a female and you're like, okay, I identify now that over-functioning is a part of being a loving spouse or mom or friend or whatever, then that makes sense that you're like, okay, well, this is what we do. But you can unlearn that, just like everything else that I talk about, right, on YouTube and my podcast, that there's so much power we have to change these tendencies. And a lot of times it really is just learned behavior. So you can unlearn it just as you learned it. So let's talk a little bit more about being aware of your own needs. How much of the time, if you have something planned and someone that you care about wants you to do something different or says we don't have money for that now, how much of the time do you abandon yourself in the quest to maintain the approval or the love of someone else? Right? Do you ever negotiate for your own needs? Do you know how? Do you think that you have a right to? Can you? Because that is something that you have to put in place if you're going to be in a healthy relationship. There's got to be the mutuality, because ultimately, what are we looking for in relationships? We're looking for interdependency, right? There has to be mutuality. And for so many years of my young life, especially in my 20s, I didn't understand that. What I learned was that I should do it all. I should add value to everyone else's life. It wasn't about the way that I felt. And for me, I really got something out of being, quote unquote, the savior in my family of origin, which this also may be something that's impacting what you're doing. And especially an alcoholic family system, there are roles that you play as a child. So there's a lot of helpful information for adult children of alcoholics that make us understand who were we in that family system, and then how does that go on to impact who we are in our relationships. So I was basically, in my family of origin, I was the hero child. So what did that mean? That meant that I felt very responsible for not just doing the right thing, I mean, obviously that, but of being an overachiever, of having perfectionist complex, and then of helping anyone who needed help. Whether it be my sisters, my mother, my family, extended family, cousins, their children, whomever. I just felt like if somebody needed help, I should do it. And yet, not until I had a cancer diagnosis in my early 30s did I realize how much that the overgiving, the overfunctioning, the not taking care of myself in a proper way, emotionally, physically, in any way. I was a workaholic. All of those things basically came to a head at this moment of being diagnosed with cancer. And I'm fine now. That was 20 years ago, but it really did impact me waking up and understanding that codependency isn't love. That real caring would need to be me taking care of myself and taking care of other people that I loved in an appropriate way, not in this extreme way. And that being identified sort of as a martyr and also feeling victimized. These are two other things that you can look at in your own life. And don't worry, this will all be on the list, the checklist, so that you're able to get an idea. Being a victim, feeling like a victim, and feeling like a martyr. These are two other ways that we know we're overgiving or overdoing something. Because why are we feeling martyred? If you find yourself saying, I can't believe they would say that or do that after everything I've done for them. So for me, unlearning this auto yes, this auto take care, this auto do for others, so much of it had to do with really getting into my own stuff, understanding where it came from, and being able to stop the auto yes. Realizing that it was my right to take time to make a decision, not just go for the instant approval of people being like, oh my God, you're so great. You're always there for me. I can always count on you. What I ended up realizing was what I was doing so that people could always count on me was abandoning myself, was me not being able to count on me. And it really left me, feeling so resentful and like such a martyr, but it also left me with the realization that when I was acting in that codependent way, when it was unhealthy helping that I was doing, that what I was also doing was blocking real intimacy. Because when I was saying yes, when I really felt no, what was I doing? I was giving the people in my life bad intel, right? Wrong information about how I really feel. Then I would be so offended. And like, I can't believe they have the nerve, after everything I've done, to ask me to do more. Well, they're probably doing that because you've been endlessly giving them wrong information about how you feel about things. So that's a lot of information. Don't worry, I've made it simple, and I've got it into a checklist, and then I've given you 3 steps that you can take to move forward in an authentically caring way in your relationships and not in a codependent way. So whatever you discover from looking at the checklist, everything is, as my friend Marie Forleo would say, everything is figure-outable. So this isn't a fatal flaw. If you're like, oh my God, I'm so codependent, that's okay. You can learn to not be. But so much of it has to do with our relationship to ourself. Doing things that actually builds real self-esteem. Not trying to fill the hole for other people, which in some dysfunctional way fills a hole for us. As we move away from codependent or unhealthy helping, we can move into building solid, loving relationships where there is mutuality, where there is interdependency. But the first step on that journey is your awareness. And that's exactly what the checklist is going to give to you. So I want to hear all about it. I want to know what you discover. So please drop me a comment. You know that I respond to everything that comes in. So if you're on my YouTube channel, drop a comment there. If you're listening to this on my podcast and you're not a subscriber to my YouTube channel, please do. We are having a raucous time over there. There's tons of activity. There's always a conversation going on. And I would love for you to join that conversation. And for my YouTube people, if you don't listen to my podcast, please do. A lot of times they're different episodes. Sometimes they're the same, but I also do interviews on both. And I would love to have you everywhere in the world of Terri Cole. So if you really like this, I would love for you to share it on your social media platforms. If you are not a subscriber, please do that right now. If you're listening to this on my podcast and you love the podcast, do me a favor. Drop a positive review on iTunes. They love that. Anyway, my point is, if you want to support the show, these are ways that you can do it. And I want to say I'm so grateful for you being here, for you listening, watching, sharing. Because when any of us elevate our mental health, everyone gets elevated. The healthier this world is, the better it is. And trust me, we need lots of mental health help right now. So I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope you have an amazing week. And as always, take care of you.